The problem with wheat, barley, rye, and oats is the protein in the grain. The protein in the grain is called gluten. Gluten is a collective term for the protein that's found in wheat, barley, rye, and oats. Gluten is the stuff that makes flour from wheat, barley, rye, and oats rubbery and flexible. It's the gluten which acts like glue, pun intended, and gives the dough elasticity, gives the flour elasticity. This is one of the reasons why it's so utilized, because the elasticity given to the flour by virtue of the gluten lends, really nice qualities to aesthetic qualities to the flour, but when it comes to your health, not so good. So gluten is the protein that's in wheat, barley, rye, and oats, and gluten is the molecule which lends elasticity to doughs made from these grains. Now, remember, gluten is a protein, and any protein is simply a daisy-chained group of amino acids. It's a bunch of amino acids that have been daisy-chained together. Now, amino acids are essential nutrients for the human body. You couldn't live without them. This is a representation of gliadin, which is one of the gluten proteins found in wheat, barley, rye, and oats. Proteins can become extremely complicated structures. This is egg white protein. This is an actual electron microscopic photograph that's been colorized by an artist of what egg white protein looks like. Proteins are extremely complicated architectural structures, but in the final analysis, they simply are a group of amino acids which are daisy-chained together. And it's the stomach's job, it's the acid in the stomach's job to break the bonds that keep the amino acids together, liberating the amino acids, which is a good idea. It's very similar to if you had a string of pearls and you broke the string and let all the pearls go. Well, that's what the stomach attempts to do with any protein that finds its way into the stomach. The stomach's job is to break the bonds which keep the amino acids together, liberating the amino acids, because this is why you need to eat protein, to get the individual amino acids, and this has to happen inside the stomach. The only problem is the chemical bonds that exist in wheat, barley, rye, and oat protein are extremely hard to break. Here's a little overview of the human digestive tract. Let's take an amble through the human digestive tract, shall we? That's the liver. That's the little gallbladder hiding underneath the liver. This, of course, is the stomach, and it's the stomach's job to break the proteins apart into their constituent amino acids. This is the colon, or the large intestine. This, by the way, is the appendix, a little appendix hanging down there. And what we need to talk about tonight, what we need to focus on, is this part of the anatomy right here, the small intestines. The small intestine's job is to absorb nutrients that you have just eaten, that your stomach has just digested, hopefully, into your bloodstream. Now, this is what the small intestine looks like if you were to cut it in half. It's a tube populated with millions of tissue called villi. And you see on the left-hand part, it looks like a plush rug inside of the intestinal tract. Well, if you zoom in on that, on those protruding structures inside the intestinal tract, they're called intestinal villi. And it is the job of the intestinal villi to absorb the molecules of food that you have just eaten and bring them into the bloodstream. That's the job of the intestinal villi. It's the job of the stomach to dissolve everything that you just swallowed into a liquid. The stomach is basically a big bag of acid, a big bag of acid. And when everything is working the way that nature intended it to, the acid in the stomach dissolves whatever it was that you just swallowed into a liquid. The liquid passes then into the small intestine, and the little villi in the small intestine absorb the molecules and bring them into the bloodstream. And that's how we get nutrition into the body, through the intestinal villi. It's fascinating, actually. The problem here, however, is the gluten protein in wheat, barley, rye, and oats is virtually impossible for the stomach to digest. Here it is again. This is one of the proteins, gliadin, one of the proteins. And remember, the stomach is like a bag of acid, and it's the stomach's job to chop the amino acids up, to break the bonds, break the chemical bonds in the amino acids, liberating the individual consistent amino acids. But the acid in the stomach can't do that. So rather than having individual amino acids now trying to be absorbed by the intestinal villi, you don't. You have an entirely intact, long, complicated architectural protein that the villi try to absorb. And that leads to nothing but trouble. When the intestinal villi attempt to absorb an undigested protein, they become destroyed. The villi become destroyed. Now, is that good or is that bad? That's bad. Now, depending upon the level of destruction of the villi, you will come down with irritable bowel, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, inflammatory bowel disease, etc., etc., etc. All of these illnesses, from the holistic point of view, are reflections of the same metabolic process, just different levels of destruction, different amounts of destruction. And by the way, there are billions of villi and microvilli in the intestinal tract, all of which are under the sway of whatever you just ate. And so depending upon your particular sensitivity to the gluten molecule, depending upon your stomach's ability to digest it or not, usually not, every time you eat wheat, barley, rye, and oats, you're going to destroy the villi, which is one of life's greatest ironies. This means the staff of life, whole grains, are one of the worst foods you can eat, because when you eat them, they destroy the villi, which leads to malabsorption, which, if you've listened to me, if you've followed me long enough, you will know malabsorption is the genesis of all chronic disease. You don't have high blood pressure because you have a bad gene. You don't have arthritis because you have a voodoo curse. You don't have fibromyalgia because you're getting older. Chronic diseases are rooted in nutrient deficiencies. Period. Your body has run out of the nutrition it needs in order to optimize its structure and function. No different than your automobile. If your automobile runs out of oil, the engine seizes. Is there anything wrong with the engine? No. You just ran out of oil. Well, it's the same with the human body. If you need 90 essential nutrients, which you do, and you eat whole grains for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, the whole grains destroy your body's or interfere remarkably with your body's ability to absorb nutrients. And if this information is compelling to you, just this information about wheat, barley, rye, and oats can save people's lives. I have a free video. It's on my website called Against the Grain. I recommend that you send it to everybody in your life, because everybody needs to stop eating wheat, barley, rye, and oats. But nobody does. And if you'd like to prove it to yourself, by the way, there's no amount of lab work that can dial in specifically whether or not you have a problem with gluten, because from our point of view, the problem here is not an allergic condition. It is not an allergy. It's a mechanical problem. It's a mechanical destruction that's happening, which is separate and distinct from an allergic reaction. We recommend everybody march quickly towards gluten-free land. And if you'd like to prove it to yourself, if you really just can't wrap your head around the notion that whole grains are bad for you, then my recommendation, become gluten-free, 100% gluten-free for 14 days in a row. 14 days in a row. And then on day 15, all I want you to do is eat gluten. Have pancakes for breakfast, cereal for lunch, a sandwich, a bagel, cookies, crackers, pizza, pasta. Go crazy for gluten on day 15 and tell me how you feel. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. When you get away from the stuff that you've developed or you've habituated to the net negative response of gluten because you've been eating it your whole life. You have forgotten what it's like to feel good in your digestive tract. So you need to shake it up a little bit. You need to open the windows and take a breath of fresh air. Go gluten-free for 14 days. And then on day 15, eat a